Hi, welcome everybody to SUSE QE Tools workshop. Today is a roadmap session for 2026-08, meaning for August of this year. I will share my screen. And this is the topic. So what we can do here is take a look back. The last time we did that was on the 12th of June. So what I would like to do is, based on this query, on all the tickets that we have resolved, I can select that specific date and say everything after that date. So we have 157 tickets. I would assume this is a little bit less than in times of before because we have a little bit of a summer vacation period. So let's take a look. Problem with the login. I don't think we have changed anything on our side to resolve that. 03 being slow, yeah, so this is a recurring problem. There's always like some bot scraping traffic and such, and there's also changes and improvements that we have applied there, but we also plan further related changes, for example, to well, keep it as convenient as possible for humans, actually improving the responsiveness by separating where we, for example, on the group overview page, right now we synchronously load the build results and the comments, and we parse all the comments. And I mean, comments are not that much text, but still, then if you do it over and over again and parse it, then do the markdown processing, then that accumulates, and also the build results are needed to reprocessed all the time, and we want to separate that. Then random problems on PowerPC, that's to be expected. We had some space alerts. Yeah, investigate frequent load spikes. So just to give you some glimpse, so we have monitoring where we monitor, for example, system load and the I/O bytes and the I/O requests and the time that it takes to process requests, and then we try to cross-link like, okay, what happened in that case, and why does it come to frequent and recurring traffic spikes? And well, in that case, it was a nice test catalog data scraping, which was going on, but there can also be many other tooling that can cause that, and we're always looking for improving the implementation on the side of OpenQA as well, because, you know, basically whatever is available over the API should be usable over the API, and we need to ensure fair usage there. And it's not about individual single tooling. Then in the OpenQA project, there was recently, or sometimes actually seldomly, there are problems that GitHub rate limiting is causing problems whenever GitHub repos are cloned or refreshed. In that case, this is one case where we have it in OpenQA and OpenQA test, and but it also happens in other cases. The approach that we take to mitigate that are one of multiple options. One would be to use something like a local mirror that is only like a local cache. A second one would be more retry with longer backoff periods to be a nice citizen. And the third one, in that case of GitHub, would be to use an authenticated account for cloning. Then there is the feature of nicer test representation, one part of that being the pretty serial markers. That feature exists for 2-3 months. Since 3 weeks or so, we have been running it on 03. there had been only minor problems, and now we switched it on by default in upstream OS order inst. And now we see the problems coming in from the corner cases, which are not covered in O3, but using this more or less the same test within OSD, because there can also be special cases, something that hasn't been foreseen yet in OS order inst, or something that needs changes in tests. Here, what I did is I focused on providing a change to the test code itself. Oh, sorry, no, this is actually a pull request from Cooksabis doing an improvement in the test code, which actually fixes that problem. And how that looks like is to say, okay, this is the pseudo test. And the pseudo test, I mean, kind of to be expected, is testing how can we change user accounts. So the test might switch to a different user account where OS audience expects that the bash prompt of a user account has the special prompt command included. Well, that new session doesn't. So we need to tell it explicitly to say invalidate the serial marker hook, meaning that OS audience knows that, okay, the hook isn't there in this user session, and that fixes the tests going on from here. And similar cases can or need to be applied in the test code whenever there's custom user switching. However, there's one thing which I would like to improve there from the side of OS order inst, which is we have the become root test API function. So I think it makes sense to also support the generic become user function for cleaner user switching. And what that one does is, so this is the test in test API. What that one does is switches the current shell sessions user to the to be specified user. Similar as become root, that's distribution specific, meaning that we have the implementation in here, and this can be overridden. And basically what this does is what we just saw in this test code adaptation, that we say like, okay, we switch the user, and then we know that we are in a different new session. That means we explicitly install the serial marker hook in there, and that means from then on also the same serial marker approach works. I guess we will see related other tickets either here or later on in the future. So let's see. Yeah, there had been multiple cases. Well, one change, multiple cases of CI failures was that Tumbleweed switched so that user bin Python 3 itself, that executable or that link, is not provided anymore by the Python base package, but by an explicit one. And this is why then test failed, because the dependencies were missing that. In that case, it was xterm console, which is also like a mini project that we maintain within the scope of developing QA, where we added that dependency. But in the meantime, also other package maintainers outside our scope fixed or adapted the dependencies, and this unblocked then some CI failures. There were other CI failures, for example, OpenK full stack test failing, exceeding runtime, no clear error message. And the no clear error message is also something where we say like, yeah, okay, we want to improve there. So what we want to do is to say like, well, we want to fix the test failure, but also for the future, we want to make sure that whenever a test fails, there's a better indication on which components do we need to look into in particular. So then we had that dependency tree evaluation took very long. So 1 month ago, if you would click on that link, that would actually kind of like bog down OpenQA and make it not be able to show dependencies at all, run into timeouts. And now you can see like it takes 1 second and it renders a nice tree again. So we optimized the queries that we need to take care of to show the jobs which are considered relevant in that scope. Download all button produces error. So there was one case where, okay, yeah, when AppArmor was enforcing that, so yeah, AppArmor prevented the access, and now the download button works also on O3 and OSD. So if we just go to any job, then there are multiple download options. There's download all, which would try to package all. That can take like a minute or so to also include the QCar file. When that can be done separately, but also it's possible to just download those individual sections. For example, if I click here, that even includes the video, but even that with efficient compression doesn't take that long. That opens a context window for me and is offering me a file for download, which is 500 kilobyte, including all those files, which I think is convenient. So then reference GitHub action versions by hash with order update. Most projects in our scope, in the OS Auto scope, and including OpenQA and Osado, also QMBot and QM Dashboard, now use the following, that to prevent any Git tag hijacking supply chain attacks, at least, what we do is that we reference the GitHub action version. So for example, like here, so here we don't. Okay. So this shouldn't be like that, because what we want to do instead of the version, we want to, maybe there's a pull request still pending. I need to check that. So what we want to do is use a hash here and not a version, because the version like v7 could be replaced. In theory, it's also possible to replace what is behind a hash with a SHA-1 collision, but this is well, much harder to achieve. If we take a look in how it should look like, we can see here that we are using this actions checkout with this hash, and then there's the comment, and DependerBot can actually work nicely with that. So DependerBot will update those versions. We can see multiple DependerBot updates, which in that case is updating the Python dependencies. But here we can see one example where DependerBot is automatically updating those hash references in GitHub Actions. What we also do here, and this is also visible, is that DependerBot automatically creates those updates as pull requests after a certain cooldown period, so not immediately, to guard against supply chain attacks again, which are, for example, happening right now in a certain scope in the NPM ecosystem. And after some days, then those are created, and then if all tests pass and there's no label by any reviewers and like to not merge that, then Mergify automatically merges those if all checks pass. So this is also covered by automatic updates in that same scope. And then clean separate OpenQA job history for independent PRs. There was an approach to, well, some products in the past already used the version field to incorporate something like a pull request on a base version plus the pull request, and using the wildcard in job templates. SLE maintenance has, for example, never used that approach. We wanted to use that because it would also prevent a wrong bug ref carryover. For example, let's say if the kernel default update for SLE 16.0 has a problem, and then somebody puts a bug ref there, and that one is carried over for new submissions of kernel default, while in parallel a kernel live patch update is also failing in the same module, but for a different reason, then that bug shouldn't be carried over. But in the past, that did happen because all of those jobs had been considered part of the same history, even though the kernel default and the kernel live patch update are not the same submission. That can now be solved with an approach. Let me see. So this was one approach where we tried to use that version field, and then we said like, well, okay, we will not follow up with that because the test code is also relying on the version being the base version, and some people didn't like it for other reasons. So what we did instead is, and I would like to show it visualized here, that one can use an additional parameter, or actually multiple additional parameters, to separate or isolate on the history. And there's one reserved keyword which automatically does that, which is submission ID. So if any test uses submission ID, automatically we can separate based on that parameter. And OpenQA gained an additional feature so that we can also visualize the combined history, basically for backward compatibility. This is the same as in before, even if those 4 jobs coming from different builds for different submissions, they are shown in the same history. If we enable the strict scenario key, then what we can see is that this is collapsed. So only those 2 jobs show up in the history because both of them are for the same submission, which I called in that case sub 1. So we can see that this job also has sub 1. And the other jobs, they are not shown in the same history because they are for different submission. In that case, sub 4, and this one was sub 3. While we are at it, I can also show one more visual thing. There's a batch. Copy markdown snippet to embed the status batch. OpenQA can create SVG images and render them dynamically from a page wherever they are called. And this batch, if you can click it, then into your clipboard, that copied a batch. And if we go to, doesn't matter, I will just temporarily include it. Oops, sorry. Wrong clipboard, like this. And then if we go for preview, then we can see that the batch is rendered pointing to that job result. The same goes for the build. So if we want to copy a batch for the build, we can also do that. And put this in here. And there's also a possibility to label that differently, like my build result. And then we can see that I broke it. Do I need to put it in a second? Probably I need to escape it, right? Yeah, my build paused. So this is a batch showing the picture, but it's also acting as a link. So this is why we have two URLs in there. And if I click there, then I'm getting back to the build overview. So with that history isolation key, I also included that in QMBot. So QMBot is now triggering all submissions with that additional submission ID. That also means that within SLE maintenance test, we automatically get that feature. The bug ref carryover is already only on the strict history anymore, but for visualization purposes, one can now switch between the different views in the UI and the according API queries. So what next? Build ISO to video container usable for OpenCase custom worker engine. I had been using that feature a lot, so this is why I wanted to also implement that. So what I did is also extend the according documentation about running a custom worker engine. There is the ISO to video test variable, which can be set. So if your OpenGL environment allows that, then one can run ISO to video with a different application. And for example, that could be a container. And what is now more convenient is that we are providing some variables. So either you give the ISO to video parameter for like a completely custom command line, and you can basically like do everything with that. Or what we can do is specify an auto-inst Git reference. That could be your personal fork when you're developing an auto-inst feature, plus a branch, or a base container name, or a combination of those. And with that, one can trigger tests with a custom auto-inst version, as well as a custom base for the container that is being used. By default, we are running within the environment of the worker OS itself. But with that container, one can also provide additional or tailored dependencies. So think about a special new package that you want to try out or want to use in OSADO tests, then you can do that by providing a container, like let it be built by OBS, and then trigger tests based on that container and the dependencies on there. Plus, if you want to develop a feature in auto-inst, then this becomes much more easy to do. And I can also show you examples where I used that. If I have its reference, let me see. Clean up empty zero boxes probably. No. 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 Yeah, here. So this lengthy command line I used to call OpenK clone job. And what I'm doing is specifying the ISO to video command line here. And what this is doing is, with this lengthy command, is installing OSADO dependencies, and then I'm pointing it to my own OS auto-inst GitHub fork. And then based on that, I could test this feature, but with OSADO test and the special dependencies. And this is like shrunk down now so that we can just specify this and the container name for the OSADO dependencies. And then this is much more convenient. So what's next? Use wordfw words to create a variable store on demand. So UEFI OVMF images sometimes need to be customized, and they need to, provide special UEFI settings or parameters or provide certificates and such, and that can now be specified in OpenQA tests directly. So one can, let's see, is there an example? Okay, there's no example in here, but I think there was also a related ticket. Yeah, okay. So this is like the old way of specifying variables, which means that those packages need to be, those files need to be installed and deployed by a package. And where should the package come from when it's just some custom image? So we don't have that in like official products. And this is why we can specify those assets like from the outside. Okay, then OpenQA support for custom secrets hiding. And ensure handling is actually documented. So what this allows is that for longer, if you do something like with underscore secret, then the variables are already properly masked. But for others, like the SUSE rec code, well, if you don't want to change the variable name, then it's also possible to set probably I should show it from here. What you can do is you can configure hide secrets regex, and with that one can also do that for other custom variables. And how does that look like then when using such variables? Well, you can see that here it says SEC rec code redacted because hide secrets regex covers that with rec code. And if you would clone that job, depending on if you're an authenticated user or non-authenticated user, then you have access to that or not have access to that. You can still clone a job if you just provide it locally when you have access to that, but cannot or do not want to authenticate with OpenKey. Then, of course, still possible to override and set those variables accordingly. Then save space by compressing OpenGA videos with more modern, better default video encoders in OS Audience. For years, OS Audience already automatically selects FFmpeg with AV1 encoding if the FFmpeg version supports that. Well, yes, but then also the underlying operating system needs to provide that. And of course, this is sometimes problematic giving licenses for video compression encoders. But in the meantime, also within Leap 16, we have access to a much more efficient encoder based on AV1, which is royalty free. And that means that by default now, all the tests, so if we just pick any job in here and take a look at the video, then this says video webm and not support. Okay, maybe not that one. Okay, maybe I broke it. If we download here, then we can see it working because it's still executed in the browser. And can I? No, I don't think I can show the video details, but it is much smaller in file size, so there must be something to it, right? Then global instance wide test settings. Now it is possible. Let me quickly note down the observations which I checked MIME type of embedded video playing and GitHub actions hashes for OS Audience. Global instance wide test settings. With that, it is possible to specify per instance, like for one OpenQA instance, some test settings you want to cover for the complete instance. And that is covered in the configuration by example here. So very simple test settings, and then some test settings which should be done for the complete global instance. And before, one needed to set that in medium machine test suites and such. So, and right, there was one change to prefer OpenGit jobs with proper Git repo URLs. For years we have tried to well, push for that feature, which also enables multiple benefits. If tests check out and reference a Git repository directly, that is possible. Also, the old way is, of course, not possible. But to nudge, one person had the nice idea, just like, well, okay, we can use the prioritization feature to say, like, rather use this one rather than the legacy way, because it is making the OpenGA instance administration easier. And with that, this yeah, can maybe nudge people without having any braking effect. And then this one I can show. Flow diagram for maintenance job scheduling that can be interesting. Improved rendering of OpenGA code. Git priorities within Smelt. Yep. So there was an ask to make the command output look better, and I can show the pull request because this one shows in screenshots. So the old approach was that one for the serial terminal in particular, one had something like those boxes which only had a hash sign and then an empty box and then exit code, which is the result of this command executed, or the next one, and another hash and another empty box. And the new approach is now much more concise and brief because, you know, from this PS1 to exit code 0, all those two middle ones, they are basically skipped because they don't transport any useful meaning. So that was done. Then now for something a bit different in the QM dashboard. In before, the priority were already shown. Let me quickly cross-check what I can. Yeah, okay. So the priorities were shown for Smelt-based incidents, but couldn't be shown for Gitty incidents because the data there come from a different data source. And what we have implemented is that now also querying Smelt for the according Gitty submission, we can cross-check and cross-validate those and then read the numbers, and also sort all submissions by the submission priority for Gitty. Not only sort for visualization purposes, but also adjust the priority with which we schedule the actual OpenGA test. An urgent submission gets prioritized in the OpenGA test schedule before a not urgent submission. Then the flow diagram for maintenance job scheduling. There is a description of an expected workflow here. It's not a flow chart. I guess that should be sufficient in describing on the top level what QMBot is doing. I hope that helps. Improved rendering of comments in OBS pointing to OpenGA test results. So one example is shown here. In Gitty, we use those OpenQA SVG batches directly. In OBS or in IBS, we cannot do that, but what we can do is at least try to render it sufficiently readable. So now it looks like this, where you have like link to the build results and then the individual job group results. So public cloud mains update test in that case with a contract address and a generic fallback address. And the last Gitty, okay, sorry, I covered that already. Cool. Any questions about the tasks that we have done in the last reporting period by you guys? Then let's go into the plan. So on the top level view, we have currently still unchanged since the last time reporting, 2 sagas which control most of our work. One is the support switch to Gitty for OpenSUSE SUSE-based products. And the second one is support SUSE-proc Office MOOC while ensuring business continuity. For the second, what we want to achieve there is a good consolidation. This is why our acceptance criteria also have some checks which can be with data sources which can be checked. Like for example, we have the inventory management system netbox, and we want to make sure that this list is empty, meaning like there are no machines left at all which are not already in the process of being decommissioned in an obsolete site, as well as the move to Prague label attack, which would be something transient. We have resolved to say like, okay, we have revisited all the machines in the new location. And then we don't have any obsolete references where machines are referenced with the old Prague 1 office FQDN, but rather use a location-based FQDN as primary one, of course still allowing CNAMEs point to the old. Then we want to make sure that all operators relying on those resources can still work, even bare metal relying on PXE, iPXE, bootp, and all that. And then we want to have our wiki describing those high-level requirements and have checks which can cross-check those high-level requirements, basically by cross-checking some of those links or in similar format as before against what we have stated on our wiki, so that we ensure we have a consistent description of our infrastructure for any further pending movers, adjustments needed, extensions with new machines and such. So as you can see, there are not that many tickets open. The consolidation here, ensuring up-to-date netbox entries, VLAN names, the automated network configuration validity check, and that should be it. For the support switch to Gitty, there is a little bit more work that still needs to be done. This also became a rather big saga, so I will think about splitting that further. And within there, what we have is like some QMBot related problems. We have the separate job history mentioned there because it also became more apparent as a problem which we want to cover there. And we have some improvement of code style check to have that as, to have maintainable tooling there. And what I'm looking for is a little bit of OpenSUSE. So support the setup of testing pipeline for maintenance per in source OpenSUSE org. That is currently ongoing. And yep, that's it for those 2 sagas. Questions about those? What would come after that would be what is planned in Saga is compliance-related improvements in preparation for any potential new audits, AI integration with OpenAI, where we already implemented like automated LLM-based log analysis. Of course, there's always a need for extended QA infrastructure for future-proof product development. For example, when products need newer generations of hardware, which we need to support while still keeping old for the old products still in maintenance, which are actually not supported on newer hardware. For example, for PowerPC, that's a thing. And then if we take a look into the immediate backlogs of the individual squads, let's first take a look for the dev team, what is currently being planned. So for example, the group overview page should not reload when going through comments. I just mentioned that in relation to any bot scraping traffic, where you would have a page like this one, and what this does is it renders all the builds and then it renders all the comments. For this page, this is not a problem. If we take a look on Tumbleweed, then first we have those 10 builds. Of course, there are more, but those are many, many jobs. And also we need to parse the comments for all the jobs which are linked there. And then we have a ridiculous high number of pages for comments. And that certainly can be, it's even not visually appealing, so that can be improved. That first we separate when do we load and process those results, when do we load and process those comments, so that when we go to any individual page, and this is what bots are doing when they scrape all the pages, and you can see like it takes like 2-3 seconds to load, then we can see like, yeah, okay, it's not showing those builds, but then it's showing those comments, and then it's showing all the other pages still. So yeah, there's still some heavy lifting going on, and that certainly can be improved. Then there was a change regarding how we clean up our results and assets and archive. And what we recently did is that we do we go over all the job groups when there is a need to clean up from results. And if there is a need to remove, then we start with whatever is the first job group in that list and remove as much as needed so that we can get below our cleanup triggering thresholds again. And we keep the state, we remember the next time we continue with the next job group, but only clean up as much as necessary. One other or complementary approach is to archive more important job results if results is full, like if we need to clean up something from results, but we have an additional archive which has free space. For example, within our internal OpenAI instance, OpenAI SUSE, we have the archive on slower storage plus a butterfs self-compressing file system. So it has much more space available and scales better, but is slower, which is fine for archived results, which we need to take longer, but then maybe take a little bit time to be retrieved because they are so seldomly accessed. And we want to leverage that by saying like, okay, rather than removing some jobs, we would move more important job results to the archive before we run out of space again. Then there's still work ongoing to make the test results more easy to review in all the different cases of either VNC-based tests, serial terminal tests, console-based tests, and all that. For example, reviewing the order inst log, and what you can already see in there is now we have markers which can be used also for an automatic lookup. For it's like, okay, in this test, in this module, in this line, this is where we from here we execute that. So a mini call trace, and then also visualize that accordingly, or provide something like direct links to the according source code view. We will investigate the throttling of uploads on one worker because we have a bottleneck on the central OpenKey web UI when too many workers, not while they run, but when they finish and they want to upload their results. And during that time, there can be a problem of a thundering herd problem, where there are so many workers trying to upload at the same time that it bogs down the web UI. All the jobs are processed correctly, but the web UI itself becomes unresponsive. And we want to keep the web UI responsive. And that means that we need to throttle the uploads on workers, and we will start with single worker first, so that we can actually run more workers in parallel and still keep the web UI responsive. Yeah, what is currently being in progress is there was some annoying full stack problem blocking our further development there. Then making the group overview, as I mentioned, more balanced and streamlined it, bring it up to date regarding the pagination of the comments, as well as preventing any, in that particular is to unnecessarily prevent AI bots or automated web scraping bots to access the same group over and over again, just with different customized limits, like show me one build, show two builds, which of course includes the results for the first build, show three builds, which of course includes the results for the first two, and such. And yeah, also one thing which I want to mention, there was a request to provide support for OVA image testing related to VMware, replacing VMDK. So that is also in development with lower priority. And yeah, rate limiting also going on. If we take a look into the backlog of the infra team, then what do we see there? We see there's some work going on regarding a SEN host that is used for the SWORD-based SEN testing. I mentioned the archive file system using ButterFS and file system compression, and that was fine in the beginning, and now it turns out that is taking quite long to mount. So if we reboot the OpenKey web UI, it can take 2 minutes to mount that one file system, meaning that also during that time, OpenKey as a web UI or as a server would be unresponsive or not reachable. And we're trying to look into that, of course, at best by not making the mount take that long. An alternative would be that OpenKey can actually start without having the archive mounted yet, because it's not immediately necessary. And then the web UI would be responsive, and then later on, if the mount point is available, then we can write the pending data. Then yeah, we still have those old Power 8 machines, which are necessary to be used in the current setup for, in particular, for testing SLE maintenance updates for older product versions. And we are trying different options there, like trying Tumbleweed to run. We can also consider to run SLE on those machines to have a still maintained machine, even though multiple restrictions. And also doing something like installing KVM capable setup on a Power 9 Alpa. Similar but different architecture would be for S390, because there's some problems with running QEMU-based tests in an SWORD setup, meaning like with libvirt controlled over SSH remotely. And we should try to use the native S390 Chemo workers directly on those hypervisor hosts, which would be more scalable, better supported, and also prevents problems like if the remote hypervisor host is not responsive, but the worker is responsive, and then how those OpenGate jobs are handled. Because if that would much better if a native S390 Chemo worker is not reachable, then the web UI can handle that gracefully, and the according jobs are just staying pending for as long as necessary until the host is back up and able to work on those jobs. Then setting up a new Power 10 machine for O3. There's also a similar related story for setting up a new Power 10 machine for OSD. I wanted to look into the CI validation for salt-based OpenGate worker config, so that we can check the worker config if it is valid before we apply those more and more complicated YAML documents to all the workers. Reinstalling workers is necessary so that we can actually have more storage available and hence be able to run more heavyweight and big OpenGate jobs in parallel. Yeah, and then the mentioned consolidation. Good. So, anyone has any questions about the presented plan for QA Dev or QA Infra? If not, then I can mention that I'm still in the process of trying to consolidating on a topic for the next workshop session. I will be not available at this time. Let's see if an appointment pops up there. If not, then in the beginning of September, Pavel Dostal will talk with you guys about OpenGate job group summary, the web version of OpenGameOn. Until then, thank you for attending and see you around. Goodbye.